Welcome to the Explainer. All right, let's just jump right in. I want you to picture your business, or honestly, any organization you're a part of, as a massive ship. You've charted your course, you know exactly where you're heading, and you've set sail into this vast, highly dynamic, and entirely unpredictable ocean of the market. But as any seasoned captain will tell you, setting that initial course, that's just step one. The real challenge is staying on course when the weather suddenly shifts, or the currents change, or a massive storm just rolls out of nowhere. So today, we're exploring exactly how you navigate those turbulent waters using a seriously powerful strategic tool. Because here is the scenario that literally keeps leaders awake at night. What happens when the very foundation of your beautifully crafted strategy just crumbles beneath you? Think about it for a second. You spend months building a flawless 5-year plan assuming a stable economy, and then boom, a global pandemic hits. Or you launch a massive new product banking on a specific regulatory environment, and overnight the government rewrites the rules. If you don't have a solid system in place to catch those foundational shifts, your long-term plans are pretty much instantly derailed.
To make sure that derailment doesn't happen to you, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, navigating unpredictable strategic waters. Second, steering versus rowing. Third, the 4 control mechanisms. Fourth, the power of premise control. And finally, testing your strategic assumptions. Let's get into it.
All right, part 1, navigating unpredictable strategic waters, the gap between formulation and achievement.
So, one of the biggest vulnerabilities in literally any organization is the massive gap between formulating a plan and actually achieving it. I mean, between the moment a corporate strategy gets finalized and the day it finally yields results, a huge amount of time passes. And during that gap, heavy investments are made, major projects are launched, and most importantly, the business environment evolves. This brings us right to our first core concept, strategic control. Think of this as a specialized form of management control that acts as a steering mechanism to guide your organization toward its long-term goals, even amidst all that crazy uncertainty. Going back to our ship metaphor, strategic control is the steering wheel. It's the continuous process of monitoring a strategy as it's being implemented, which is what actually allows managers to take corrective action and keep the whole operation stable on its chosen course.
Moving on to part 2, steering versus rowing. Understanding the levels of organizational control.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need to draw a sharp contrast between 2 different levels of control. Over here on the right, we have operational control. Now, this is the rowing. It's totally focused on task-level performance. It's asking questions like, hey, are our time schedules being met, and are we utilizing our resources properly? It's all about post-action evaluation over short day-to-day periods. But on the left side, we have strategic control. This is the steering. It deals with the much broader, overarching issues. It handles the sheer uncertainty of a changing environment and constantly tracks that long-term strategy. Because look, you can have the best rowers in the entire world hitting every single operational KPI flawlessly, but if the strategic steering is aimed straight at a rocky shore, yeah, the ship is still going to sink.
Which brings us to part 3, the 4 control mechanisms, the captain's navigational dashboard. If we're actually going to steer effectively, management has this specific dashboard of instruments they can use to maintain strategic control. And according to the literature, there are 4 primary types you need to know. First up is premise control, which we are going to deeply unpack in just a second. Second is implementation control, which evaluates whether your ongoing plans, your programs, those big milestones, are actually moving you closer to the ultimate goal. Third is strategic surveillance, which is this broad-based, constant vigilance across all your daily operations to catch any totally unanticipated threats. And fourth is special alert control. This one is an immediate, intense reassessment that gets triggered by a sudden shock. Think something massive like a natural disaster or a huge stock market crash. All right, part 4, the power of premise control, examining the load-bearing walls of your strategy.
Now, while all 4 of those dashboard instruments are totally vital, today we are laser focusing on those load-bearing walls. And the crucial takeaway here is summarized perfectly by this quote from our source materials. Strategy is built around several assumptions or predictions. Let that sink in. Every single strategic plan, no matter how brilliantly conceived it is essentially just a prediction about a future reality. You're constantly making assumptions about your competitors, your customers, the economy, and even your own internal capabilities. I mean, think about Blockbuster assuming physical DVD rentals would stay king forever, while Netflix bet the house on streaming. Blockbuster's entire strategy was built on a premise that just suddenly evaporated. So the big question is, what happens if your prediction is wrong?
Well, that is exactly where premise control comes in to save the day.
It's defined as the systematic and continuous process of checking whether the initial assumptions or predictions, the premises on which your strategy was built, are still valid. You kind of want to think of it as a continuous radar scan, constantly checking for microscopic cracks in the foundation of your building. Because if a vital premise is no longer valid, the strategy itself might have to be entirely rewritten.
And to do this effectively, you have to map out your assumptions across two massive spheres, the external environment and the internal environment. Looking externally, we're making predictions about the climate, the overall economy, new technology, political and legal shifts, what the competition is up to, media, and yes, even fashion trends depending on your industry. Then internally, we're making assumptions about our organizational culture, human resources, physical assets, profit margins, cash flow, and management capabilities. Premise control basically means actively keeping a close eye on all of these branches to see if the reality of today still matches the prediction you made on day one.
Let's bring it home with Part 5, testing your strategic assumptions, executing premise control in practice.
Okay, so now that we know what premise control is and the broad environments it actually covers, how do we test these strategic assumptions in the real world? Well, organizations typically track three main types of assumptions. First, you've got environmental factors. This means keeping a pulse on broad macro shifts, like new government policies or inflation hitting the broader economy. Second, industry factors. This tracks the microenvironment, things like the specific type of competition in your market. For example, are your rivals suddenly launching aggressive new pricing strategies? And third, organizational factors. This looks completely inward, maybe assuming that your team is going to achieve a massive breakthrough in R&D perfectly on schedule. Now, because tracking all of this requires such intense, dedicated focus, the responsibility for premise control is frequently assigned to corporate planning staff. They're the ones officially tasked with identifying these key assumptions and keeping a regular, formal check on whether or not they hold water.
So why does dedicating an entire team to track these assumptions matter so much? Because early detection of invalid premises literally equals strategic survival. It's that simple. The sooner these flawed assumptions are detected and thrown out, the better your chances of actually taking corrective action. It gives strategists the ultimate competitive advantage, the gift of time. You get the time you desperately need to alter your strategic direction or reformulate the plan before you keep sailing down a path that's based on totally erroneous, outdated assumptions.
We've covered a lot today. The macro journey of strategic control, the massive difference between steering and rowing, and the absolute necessity of continuously validating your foundational predictions through premise control. So I want to leave you with a final thought, something you can apply to your own work literally right now. Take a hard look at the plan sitting on your desk and ask yourself, is your current strategy based on yesterday's reality? Because if you aren't actively testing your premises, you might just be expertly rowing a ship that is steering in the completely wrong direction. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep validating those assumptions, and I'll catch you next time.